we have Sharon Yavrom as our speaker today. She's a scientist who's currently working on T cell therapy, and she's going to just be talking to us about her career and and really just give us advice about all of us who are interested in STEM too. Thank you so much for coming. Um, would you be okay with like maybe giving us a little background about how you got interested in what you're doing right now?
Yeah, sure. So, I was a biology major in college, and I loved science. My only knowledge of what you could do with science was to go to medical school. I didn't know anything about any other type of sciences. And so my focus was to go to medical school. Can you guys hear me and everything? Yeah. And I that was that was my plan, was to go to medical school. And then while I was in college, I went to San Jose State University. When I was in college, I saw a flyer on the wall. There's a NASA center not far from San Jose State that did life science projects. And so I basically saw this flyer to work there, and I kind of was like a lab helper there. And that kind of turned into a full-time permanent job for me when I got out of college. And I worked on rat experiments that flew in space on space shuttles. So it was really fun. It was a long time ago. There's not really a shuttle program right now, but it was really fun. I helped prepare the experiments that were flying on the shuttle. Had to go to Kennedy Space Center to launch the the rats in space. Had to go where the shuttle used to land and collect the animals and do all the type of research we were going to do on those animals. And then while I was there, I had never seen like science like this before. I only knew about medical school, and it really intrigued my interest. Um, and then one of the ladies that I worked with there, she was a scientist at UCSD, she invited me to come work in her lab back at UCSD. And so I joined her lab as a lab tech, working on, we were doing orthopedic research, looking at myosin, um, I forgot, fibers and things like that. But I had never worked in a wet lab before. So that was my first time doing that. And I actually fell in love with it. And so I disappointed my father by telling him that I didn't want to go to medical school, that I wanted to pursue a PhD. So then after that, but my undergrad GPA was not that great, and be honest with you. I had a lot of fun in college. I was a really good student in high school, but college was like a new experience for me. And so I let my grades slip. So I knew I had to do some work in order to get into a good graduate school program or a PhD program. So I ended up taking applying for a post-baccalaureate program at Harvard University. And honestly, they kind of rejected me, but they also said that if I wanted to come, I could still come, but like they didn't really think there was a lot they could help me with improving my GPA and stuff. But that door cracked open and I walked through it. So I moved to Boston. Actually lived with Ella's dad is my cousin. I actually spent a week getting settled living with him while he was in medical school. And when I was there, I took the advantage of everything I possibly could. I got a paying job in a lab at MIT. I got a mentor at Harvard. I worked in his lab at the in immunology lab at the Channing Institute, Brigham and Women's Hospital. And so I continued my work as a bench scientist, and then I applied to graduate school from there. And I took the GRE and all of that kind of stuff. Um, and I will say I had a bit of a time getting into graduate school. And to be honest with you, almost every school well, actually all schools I applied to, so like UCLA, UC Irvine, UC San Diego, um, even San Diego State, because they have like a joint PhD program. I applied to Harvard, Columbia, and also USC, University of Southern California. I actually got a rejection letter from every single one of those places, which was a little bit tough. I think I had a lot of research experience, but I had a hard time bringing up my GPA because like I said, I wasn't A's, I wasn't all A's and B's, so it was a little bit tough. I actually also spent time when I was working at NASA, I continued to take classes at San Jose State, some master level classes trying to help improve that GPA. But actually what happened is the department chair from the pathology department at USC reached out to me in an email and gave me an opportunity to write a 10-page paper about something that his lab studied and to propose some experiments. And if I could send that in to him, he was willing to take another look at me as a PhD student. And I did that. And then I got like an official, you're in, accepted to USC. So I would say I'm a person who, when the doors are partially open, I walk through. So I wasn't going to let it go. But a lot of doors have been closed in my face. So I joined a lab there. I predominantly worked as in molecular biology. My area of interest at first was cancer, which is what I do now. But things happened with my first PhD advisor, and I ended up switching advisors to a man who is a world-renowned expert in his field, but the field was in liver disease, which really wasn't my interest, but soon became my interest. So I spent, in total time, it took me 7.5 years to finish my PhD partially because I switched labs after 2 years. And the reason I did that is because my first PhD advisor, he started a company. And in graduate school, you have like your PhD advisor, but you also have like a department advisor. And that advisor suggested that my PhD advisor was focused on building a company and not necessarily mentoring a student. So I switched labs. And then I will say graduate school is tough. I think the saying when you go in is, if it was easy, everyone would do it. Because I was in a pathology department, I took the first 2 years of medical school with the medical students. Plus I had additional like molecular biology type stuff that the medical students didn't have to take. And the pathway in graduate school is you first do a couple years of academic work in classrooms, and the medical school classroom was just as you think, like it's a big auditorium. You're with all the for year 1 and year 2 medical students. But the PhD classes are more like discussions. It's more you having to come up with ideas. They're a lot more discussion based where you read papers and then you discuss them. It's a little bit different than what I experienced in the medical school coursework there. And then during that 2 years while you're taking classes, you're also rotating through other people's labs, trying to determine who's going to be your PhD advisor. So I did that. As I said, I first picked this one man who was doing cancer, and I ended up, after 2 years, changing to another man. So I kind of have to start again. In PhD world, your work belongs to the investigator or your primary investigator. So if you leave that lab, you have to kind of start again. So that's why it took me an additional 5.5 years to finish my PhD. And so I will say, in the world of bench work, my colleagues all said my hands doing pipetting, gene therapy. I did lots of animal work, surgeries, and all kinds of things. I made knock in, knock out, genetic model animals. I did all kinds of stuff. It was very hard for me, actually. What I actually kind of found out is I was a very good lab technician. But thinking up the things myself and really designing experiments and things like that came hard for me. And then the execution of those experiments, usually the experiments don't prove your hypothesis. They prove the null hypothesis, or else technically it just didn't work. Something happened. It was very hard on me to graduate school. I'm not, just to be honest with you. So when I was finishing up graduate school, one of my friends had a job at a pharmaceutical company, and she was making a lot of money. And I was a poor graduate student at the time. I got paid in graduate school. For your PhD, you don't pay tuition, and instead the graduate school pays you a stipend because you can't have any other jobs. You're basically in graduate school, so they pay you the whole time you're there, but it's a very small salary and they pay for your health insurance. So when you walk out of your PhD program, you are basically debt free, and you have this degree. Well, traditionally, when you're in graduate school, after you finish your PhD, you go on to do further training as a research fellow. It's called a uh, doctorate fellowship. And then after that, you try and find an academic position for yourself. Well, I already knew I was having a hard time just to finish the PhD. And as I said, this friend of mine, she worked in pharmaceuticals, an area, again, I never thought that there was a place for me in a pharmaceutical company, but it turned out that there was, and that pharmaceutical companies really like MDs and PhDs for a couple of the same and a couple of the different reasons, because you have this higher learning qualification and you can understand things at a very deep level, but also you can know them at a very high level. It leads to the ability to be very strategic. You know how to design studies and things like that. And so a friend of mine had a job like that. So I kind of, instead of doing the postdoc route, I decided to immediately join a pharmaceutical company. And that's what I do now. I've been in the pharmaceutical company for about 20 years. I have I'd spent about 10 of my years I spent in something called medical affairs. Medical affairs is a department that is an outward facing part of the company. We talk with doctors and scientists about our research that we do at companies, and especially the clinical trials that we have ongoing at our company. We also are subject matter experts on our drugs. And we also do a fair amount of sales support. So say like a doctor has a question. So the sales rep can only talk on what the FDA has approved the drug for, but say somebody wanted to use a drug, it's approved for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but they want to use it in breast cancer, let's say. Um, a sales rep can't do that type of work. So they have to bring in someone like me who's a scientist, who's going to try my best not to be biased and things like that, and give them like what we've done and what could potentially be done with a drug like that. So I did that for about 10 years. That was a very cool job, I have to say. I work from home. I got a free car, free internet. My life living on the road, traveling, visiting these doctors, which much more bougie than the life I lived at home. Ella's been to my San Francisco apartment. She knows it was very small and humble. But, when I traveled for the company, I had staying at really nice hotels, valet. I had an expense account where I could spend $125 on each meal every day. And if I took a doctor out, I could spend that much on them as well. So I did that for a long time. And then I decided to move into something called clinical development. And I predominantly focused my career in pharmaceutical in oncology. So I'm back in cancer, which I really like. And so I shifted my career into what's called clinical development. So now I'm more of a not so much outward facing role. I design clinical trials um, with usually an early phase one, phase two of clinical design. So that means that the molecules that I research on have already been validated in the lab. So we've already done animal work, we've already done toxicology work, cellular work, and now we're ready to put them in patients. And I design the studies for those. I analyze the data. I work with investigators at different hospitals all over the world. And what I do is I basically design a study, and then there's a clinical research organization that I work with that introduced the study to different investigators. They're usually physician scientists at different research centers. And then I work with them. Like today, I met with a woman in Australia and I presented what our